Okay, for the rest of the training, we'll be taking a look at the specific roles that we play in the lives of people in poverty. We'll be looking specifically at parenting, partnering, and mentoring. Let's begin with parenting. In this section, we'll be specifically talking to those of us who parent children or adolescents from poverty. So specifically, we're talking to the foster parents, safe families, resident advisors. And the key thing is, everyone else, I would encourage you to pay attention to this section because this section does serve as a framework for the partnering and mentoring sections as well. Yeah. So one of the key areas in research in respect to behavior is the issue of the locus of control. And this is the concept that says I have control over my outcomes. I have an impact or say in the things that happen in my life. Or this is the mindset that says I have no effect. I have no impact on my personal outcomes. I'm a part of a system that I can't escape. And it's just my bad luck that has me continually having negative things happen to me. Now, the culture in generational poverty is that of unconditional love and a present focus. Therefore, the idea that discipline is to change behavior doesn't fit in that model. One of the first things we have to understand about poverty is that discipline is about forgiveness and apology, not necessarily change. And in order to survive in a middle-class driven world, one of the things that we have to teach our kids is self-governance. In order to do that, I'd like to compare the difference between teaching a lesson and teaching self-governance. Now, when you compare the two, let's start with teaching a lesson. You, the parents, is responsible for creating the reward and the consequences. You are the final authority, and the results of the failure or success of your intervention depend on how well you perform in teaching that lesson. Now, the difference is with teaching self-governance, you, the parent, create the win-win situations. You're a collaborative voice, and the results of success or failure really depend on how that child chooses. Now, again, the key to this is allowing the child to think for themselves. And it is our response to consistently support their decision. And sometimes us supporting their decision means giving them a reward, and it may mean giving them a consequence. But either way, the key thing that we're getting across is that they have an influence on their outcome. Another way to approach this is to consider that every person grows up with three voices: the child voice, the parent voice, and the adult voice. The issue with children from generational poverty is that many times they're forced to take up the job of parenting themselves or someone else well before they should have to. Therefore, the well-developed parts of reasoning would be the child voice and the parenting voice. Now, the child voice is defensive, it's victimized, it's emotional, whining, it has a losing attitude, it's strongly negative and nonverbal. Things you would hear in the child voice is, "Quit picking on me, nobody likes me, I hate you, you're ugly, don't blame me, she did it." Now, the parent voice is the authoritative, directive, judgmental, is the evaluative voice. It's a win or lose mentality. It's demanding, punitive, and sometimes it can be threatening. And what you'll usually hear in the parenting voice is, "You should do that. It's wrong to do this. You are a good boy. You're a bad boy. You're worthless. You're beautiful." Any judgment or evaluative comments, or "do as I say." In the face of crisis, you're either going to hear the child voice or the parent voice come out of a child. And the truth is, the child voice is associated with vulnerability. It's associated with them feeling weak. So many times they're going to rather opt to use the parent voice, which comes off as defiant, which comes off as oppositional, as disobedient. I'm not advocating that you should never use the parent voice. In fact, as foster parents, one of the healthiest things we can do for our foster children is to allow a child to be a child. Therefore, it is a healthy thing to exercise the parent voice for your children to help them feel safe being a child. The use of the adult voice is really what we're advocating for. As much as possible, this will teach a child to begin to think for themselves. And the adult voice is a non-judgmental, free of negative, non-verbal, it's factual, often in question format, and it has a win-win attitude. Examples of the adult voice can be, In what ways could this be resolved? How will we know the solution is working? I would like to recommend. What are the choices in this situation? Options that we can consider are, or let's agree to disagree. Let's use the acronym COPING to remember how and when to use the adult voice. Let's start with C, control. Make sure the child's in control of themselves. It's best to use the adult voice when the child is rational, when they're calm, when they can actually think through the following steps. Next, let's orient. Let's allow the child to tell their story, what happened. This is important because it almost gives the opportunity for the child to express a backdrop of a story that we are not aware of on the factual end of things. Next, let's look at patterns. Why did this happen? Allow the child to prove their case. Allow them to give evidence for their reasoning. And that will feed into the next part, which is investigate. Well, what are our alternative options? This is a great opportunity to ask a child, hey, what would you do differently? And you might have to go through this question about 5 or 6 times before a solution that's a win-win comes up. Next, let's look at negotiate. This is where we find win-win solutions. We're going to negotiate an agreement to the appropriate behavior. All right, and lastly, of course, we want to give our support. Give the child support and encouragement. Also, giving support for a child's decisions may also be giving a reward or a consequence for actually executing the contract that was negotiated. So those are this coping acronym is a great tool on how to use the adult voice. At this point, I'd like you to take some time to review what we just covered in this section of parenting, discuss some things that you've learned, as well as some things that you will strive to work on moving forward. Okay, I'd like to add a few things to your list. One, learn to use the adult voice. Learn how to use it, when to use it. Use that acronym COPING that we came up with. Also, try to avoid power struggles and manipulation. Those things will kind of deteriorate and eat at the work that you've done in teaching self-governance. Also, understand story structure and casual register. Learn to understand the children in that register and learn how to speak it as well. And lastly, try to take every opportunity of crisis as an opportunity for change. Those are the opportunities that we have to allow the children to think for themselves, to make their own decisions, and to honor their decision with a reward or with a consequence as a follow-up. And the key thing behind that is consistency, how we will consistently use those times of crisis for opportunities to teach that child self-governance. Okay, so we move forward to partnering. These are the staff that are usually the ones that have brief but frequent contact with clients and people in poverty. These are also the people that are responsible for setting the climate and the tone for the organization. So we're talking about our case managers, we're talking about our receptionists, people that answer crisis calls. Also, we're talking to the parents of teenagers. So resident advisors are also in this category. So let's take some time to explore some tools that we can use to partner better with people from poverty. Again, I need to stress that the institutions that govern education, social services are dominated by middle-class hidden rules. Therefore, for a person in poverty, they have to learn how to thrive and exist in a middle-class oriented world. Now, there are going to be two differences in the poverty class and middle class in their approach. One, the poverty class is going to be more survival oriented, so you'll see much more sensory dependent and nonverbal feedback, as opposed to the middle class, which is more achievement oriented. Therefore, you'll see a lot more abstract and verbal approach. Now, because of that, there are going to be some cognitive issues that the poverty class are going to come across in relating to a poverty or a middle class oriented world. So let's take a look at those cognitive issues. One of the issues is a blurred and sweeping perception and a lack of a systemic method of exploration. All right. This is in response to long-term trauma, and it causes a person to be random and episodic. Therefore, there isn't a systematic or predictable way of collecting information for finishing a task. In other words, a person will only see 50% of what's on a page. Therefore, in response, it would be good for us to spend time giving concrete directions. It would also be good if we focused on summarizing directives and asking questions to ensure that the individual you're working with understands the information. Another cognitive area is impaired verbal tools. If parents rely solely on casual register, they tend to lack the adverbs and the prepositions in their speech. Therefore, they have a hard time describing or verbalizing how they need help. They may not have the verbal bank to better define their problems and areas of help. In response to this, we want to use reflective listening. We want to paraphrase what they're saying and use our own words. Essentially, we want to really spend time on trying to understand the problem from their perspective before we move to solutions. Impaired temporal orientation. This is the inability to organize and measure in time, where time is seldom valued. Time is measured emotionally in poverty. Whatever feels right in the present, it's what's done. Also, adults from poverty, the workday competes with personal demands of children, car issues, relatives. And one of the ways that we can help families with this is, rather than giving a specific time for meetings, or what we can do instead is provide a range of time or an open door time for a meeting. There can also be a lack of precision and accuracy in data gathering. Due to the lack of strategies, individuals from poverty often lack the problem-solving skills needed to complete a task. It's harder to gather data and to find realistic strategies to produce success. And the key way that we can assist is to help through mediation. Mediation is key in helping individuals overcome some of their cognitive issues. Now, simply mediation gives one the ability to identify relationships. In other words, we're helping a very sensory dominant person understand the relationship between very abstract concepts. And how we're going to do this? It's three parts. One, we're going to state the what. What is the stimulus? What are we after? Then we're going to talk about why. Why is it important? And we have to give it meaning. After that, we'll talk about the how. We're going to provide a strategy to how we're going to achieve that. So here's an example. The abstract concept is you need a job. Okay, so let's mediate. You need a job because you need to put a down payment on an apartment. So meet me at 9 a.m. on Tuesday at Workforce One for this interview. In that, I've stated the what, I've stated the why, and I've also stated the how. Basically, we're teaching cause and effect. Now, how do we bridge that cause and what needs to happen to an actual result or outcome? There are specific ways that we can actually help teach mediation. One is to teach abstract time. And the way we do that is we start at the beginning and plan backwards. An example of this is if you have an interview at 9 a.m., what needs to happen at 8:45? What needs to happen at 8:15? What needs to happen at 8 o'clock? And you're breaking down backwards on planning. Also, you can teach part to whole, and if you start with the overarching goal, you can then break down into bits and pieces on how to achieve that overarching goal. And lastly, you can also teach goal setting. And the key to goal setting is to write down the goals. Written goals are much more effective than conceptual goals. In partnering with individuals from poverty, it's essential that we find ways to invest in the relationship rather than taking away from the relationship. Again, we've spoken about how important relationships are to people that are in poverty. The currency of poverty is relationships. So we have to understand ways to make deposits and not withdraw. So let's look at the first piece here, appreciation for humor and entertainment provided by the individual, as opposed to put downs or sarcasm about the humor or the individual. And again, we're emphasizing the fact that the relationships and the personalities from that individual are the key pillars to building partnership. So you have to put value in humor, and you have to put value in that individual's ability to entertain you. Also, acceptance of what the individual cannot say about a person or situation is a great deposit, as opposed to insistence or demand for full explanation about a person or situation. There are many times where you'll run across individuals that cannot fully disclose some of the history, some of the context in their lives. And the key thing that we have to be after is that we have enough information to serve them. And that applies across board. It stops to where abuse or neglect may be an issue. And in those cases, it is important that we collect what information we need, again, to better serve the individuals involved. But otherwise, we want to accept what an individual cannot share or cannot say, and be okay with that. Also, let's show respect for the demands and priorities of the relationships, as opposed to insistence on a middle-class view of relationship. We want to respect the flow of life for the individuals that we work with. There are priorities in their lives that may not be priorities for us, that may not fit into our priority box, but we, at the end of the day, must respect it. We may not agree, we may not do the same thing, and that is okay. But that doesn't necessarily mean that gives us room to insist or demand or threaten based on our own personal value-based or view of relationships. Remember, we have to use the adult voice and instead of using the apparent voice, especially in partner relationships. That is essential. Let's assist with goal setting instead of telling the individual his or her goals. And this is the adult voice. This is where we have to be collaborative. We have to kind of work with that individual. Where is it that they want to go, and what role can you play as a partner to support them towards that goal? Let's identify options related to available resources instead of making judgments on the value and availability of resources. So we want to identify the options, the positives, what are the resources that the family has, instead of paying attention to what they're lacking or what they don't have. But we want to look at what those resources open up, what doors do they open up, what options are available due to the resources, the people, the emotional resources, the financial resources, or whatever that might be. And let's seek to understand the importance of personal freedom of speech and individual personality rather than assigning derogatory character traits to the individual. So we have to be able to look at some of the things that for the individual working with identifies personal freedom, that identify speech, that identify individual personality, and whether that might be the clothing that they choose, and whether that might be a car they choose to drive, just whatever other things that might make up that doesn't necessarily align with our own personal middle class or wealthy class views. Let's not assign and resort to assigning derogatory characteristics. Let's instead understand why it's important to them and move forward in a relationship. Great. At this point, I'd like you to take some time to review what we went over in this partnering section. Write down some things that you've learned that are brand new to you, as well as some things that you plan to work on moving forward. At this point, I'd like to add a few things to your list. One, remember to use the adult voice. I can't stress this enough. In fact, the overuse of the parent's voice in any mentoring or partnering relationship can be poison to the relationship. And just to think, for any individual that spent most of their lives parenting themselves or somebody else, it is unbearable to receive constant directives from a parent voice. And the assumption for the assumption for a staff to do this comes from the idea that because an individual lacks resources, they lack intelligence. And that is far from the truth, and that is completely offensive. So we have to remember to use the adult voice and a collaborative voice whenever possible. All right. Also, provide mediation. As much as possible, try to teach that relationship between cause and effect, goal setting, to help people achieve their goals. And also, as much as possible, and I've said that so many times, learn to value the individual. Find value in their culture, find value in their identity, in the way that they think about the world, and understand their perspectives and realities as well. Let's look at mentors. Now, we're going to kind of just flow right through this last section, but mentors are absolutely important. In fact, in order for an individual that lives and knows poverty to be able to exist in a world that's dominated by middle class rules, a mentor is needed. And the image that comes to mind is the fact that at some point in my timeline or in your timeline, somebody had to transition from a foreign country to the U.S. And in order for that person's success to happen, there had to be a family member or a friend that was able to help that individual transition and learn the language and learn the rules and learn how to survive in this new land. In the same way, we need mentors, and mentors need to be involved in the lives of people in poverty. So let's take a look at this section and learn some key tools that we can use in making our mentoring more effective. We will be taking a look at the 16 laws of mentoring. Let's start with these 4. I'd like you to take some time to read through these 4 and start to define what they mean for you. Okay, positive environment. There needs to be sufficient time and environment to encourage honest and open discussion. Developing character. One thing to understand is that people from generational poverty are not lacking in the values that develop good character, but like all of us, they might need some help in translating those values into real actions. Independence. Most mentors may want to set a very rigid boundary when it comes to their time, energy, and personal assets. It's important to be flexible, but it's important also to understand those boundaries. Because one of the characteristics of generational poverty is the view that people are resources. People in poverty need to share, lend, and offer hospitality in ways that are different from the middle class system. Also, limited responsibility. This is where we are going to be responsible to them, but not responsible for them. The mentor is not the protege's savior or mother. The mentor's job is to share what he or she knows and respect the rights of the protege. Okay, let's look at the next set of laws. Again, I'd like you to take some time to read through these 4 and define them for you. Share mistakes. Feel free to share your failures as well as your successes. Planned objectives. Prepare specific goals for your relationship, where it's heading. Inspection. It's important to inspect the relationship, to monitor, review where the relationship is and where it's going, as well as to inspect the progress. People will do what's inspected, not always what's expected. Tough love. Know when to intervene, and possibly when to intervene punitively, and know when also to let go. Okay, let's take a look at this set. Again, I'd like you to take some time to read through and put down some definitions. Small successes. We want to remember that truly significant successes are made up of small, consistent successes. So we want to also remember direction and to use our adult voice in giving directions. We want to have collaborative discussions and give collaborative direction. Remember, the mentor is a resource. Risk. A mentor should always be aware that a protege's failure may reflect back on him or her. And a protege should realize that a mentor's advice will not always work. So it's better to offer possible solutions than to give direct advice. And mutual protection. Let's maintain privacy. In the beginning of any mentoring relationship, it's important that the mentor outlines the clear boundaries on what they can and cannot keep secret. Okay, let's look at this last set, and again, I'd like you to take a look at these four and write some definitions. Okay, communication. Listening is the best way to gather information about the needs of the protege. Certain balance should be established so that both parties share and respond. Extended commitment. This is the issue of how accessible the mentor chooses to make themselves to the protege. This is a rule or a law that I leave up to the mentor to decide whether you want to share cell phone, email, home address. Life transition. The results on one study show that individuals who experienced a sense of helping future generations did not stagnate, but continued to move on to the next stages in life. In fun, laughter. Humor enhances relationship. It's a shared response, so make sure that you're enjoying the relationship. Again, I'd like you to take some time to review this section and write down some things that you've learned about yourself, as well as some things moving forward that you plan on working on. I'd like to add a few things to that list. One, seek first to understand. In mentoring, and this speaks to the collaborative effort from a mentor to listen, to reflect, and to be, again, that adult voice for that protege. Also, we want to build personal emotional capacity. And we do this through prayer. We do this through time with accountability groups or with groups that understand what you're going through. And as well as I'd encourage you to find a hobby outside of the mentoring relationship that feeds you, that nourishes your emotional capacity. I also encourage you to stay open to feedback from your protege, from supervisors, about the relationship and how it's going and growing, which speaks into you investigating and kind of looking back into and measuring how well the mentoring relationship is going. And lastly, I'd encourage you to always be willing to apologize, always be willing to admit wrong and admit, hey, how you would do things differently if given an opportunity. We have reached the end of this training. I thank you for taking the time and giving this training your attention. I'm sure that there's some information that will benefit your work with the group that you work with. I'm going to include my list of references, and I specifically like to pay attention to the book from Robin Payne, Bridges Out of Poverty, that a lot of this information I was able to take out for this training. So please continue to pray and continue to work diligently with our kids.